And we are live. Hello. Oh. You can see you can probably see the changing about and testing of my equipment there. So how's everyone doing? Unless my screen is lying to me. Yeah, anyway. So today I decided to do something a little bit different because I managed to get some of the video tech working with OBS and with something called MPV. No notification, yeah, I'm not surprised. So, if you guys want to share it, that would be ideal, and I will of course be taking questions from riot.renaissancemen.xyz and from the live chat. Now today we're going to be responding to a video from someone who is very critical of traditional femininity. And from all I can tell, from what brief time I have seen her, she appears to come from a very, very similar background to myself. Although she sort of stayed on track in the atheist kind of modern view of things, I suppose I'd call it, whereas I went in a more traditional direction. I think it's a moment where there can be quite a bit of teaching. And of course I'll be taking questions as things go by. So if you guys want to stick questions in the chat, we will begin to play it, because there's going to be a lot to say here. If it will show up. There we go. Took a second there. Right, so essentially, one thing I wanted to preface this with, because I have a very strong suspicion that the person in question will watch this. If I sound like I'm trying to be smart or overly arrogant through the citation of sources through voice, I want you to understand explicitly that I am streaming this and I don't know what I'm going to cite. I've got a rough idea, but I haven't stuck them in the description, so I'm just going to say them with my voice. Right? I don't want to come across like I know some sort of tradition that anybody doesn't know. Because I've realised that I sometimes give that impression when I will cite something that's perhaps lesser known in the current literature. Anyway, let's begin.
Hey everyone, it's the middle of the night, so when better to film a video with wine? Today we are going to be looking at this blog that I came across this evening called Virtuous Femininity, where the author is a young Christian woman. She describes herself as a homemaker and feminine.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys some prior warning, right? I don't think necessarily that the woman that she is responding to is coming from the most solid position, but I don't hold that against her, because it's very difficult to find the materials to really back up this kind of lifestyle in the modern times, because they just simply aren't taught. Now, I do think that the instinct from the woman that this woman is responding to is correct, but I'll give a bit of a warning there. By the way, if you guys want to know the player I'm using MPV, because VLC won't work.
And as someone who aspires to use this blog as constant motivation for my fellow sisters in Christ, she writes,
Based?
that I truly believe that God's divine order for man is the blessing we need to revive again, first starting in our minds, then our households. She goes on to say, being raised by grandparents born in the late 30s, I was raised with gender roles and a godly fear. My parents raised me in a traditional home where respect and family order was very present. I'm eternally grateful for my upbringing. I hope I can inspire many women, both younger and older, to find motivation, discipline, solace, and joy in my work. So...
Okay, so just to check, you pretty much got an introduction there. Everyone's seeing this correctly, right? If you can see it, give me a 1. If you can't, give me a 2. Just want to be absolutely sure here, because I don't want to have this playing to herself. You can't see the video moving, but you can hear the audio, because I know you can hear the audio, because you can probably hear the fan in the background, because it's rather warm. In fact, she lives rather close, from what I can tell, to where I am. So that's another reason why I made this, because I figured, well, similar cultural background might be able to get through. Is there any 1s and 2s? Oh, okay, we're getting 1s. Okay, great. It's choppy. Yeah, it's going to be choppy. I think that's... I'll tell you what, we'll change the background because that might be making it a bit more choppy. Apologies for anybody watching this in future, streams. I'm experimenting with the background thing just to, see what I can do, right? We're going to change it to... You know what? Nah, I'm not going to do that. That's wasting time. It can be choppy. As far as I'm concerned.
Not to be rude, but this is very clearly a case of childhood indoctrination,
Okay, so it's a case of childhood indoctrination. I don't know how she can know this, considering... Yeah, you know what? If it's a slideshow, I'm just going to delete the background. I'll delete the background video source because that's probably slowing it down. And we will just we'll just choose a nice image and then move it back. My apologies, guys. I am of course always testing with these sorts of things to make sure it's an entertaining watch. But if it's lagging, it's lagging. I'm in the wrong folder. We'll pick something nice. We'll pick a nice icon, won't we, guys? Yeah, let's pick this one. Something that fits the tone, maybe. There we go. Is that better? It should be better because it's not chopping in the background now. Right. Okay. So, so the indoctrination thing. Sorry, I've just seen some people I know have joined the chat. Yeah. So, as someone who converted from atheism, from a similar background to this woman, yeah, no, she has no grounds on which to say this. And as we'll see later on, she is suffering from the same thing. Yeah, like as the geoconservative says, to an atheist, being raised anything other than atheist is indoctrination, right? It's because people have a tendency to assume that atheism is just the midpoint, which it isn't. There's no unobjectivity. There's no centrist position in this. Atheism has its own assumptions. In fact, one book I was going to cite, called Gnostic America. I should have really had this next to me during the stream. Actually sets out a creed for these people. Because, Christians, of course, have the Nicene Creed. And it only makes sense that the atheist, or the modern person, more accurately, because really, there are only very few atheists. There are people who just don't really care, and that's most people. But there are some interesting connections. Let me just quickly find it. Here we go. Right, this is from Gnostic America, a reading of contemporary American culture and religion according to Christianity's oldest heresy. I apologise, this has gone really choppily to begin with. I should have been more prepared. This is a summation of essentially what modern people believe. I am an absolutely free self, born randomly in the body I have. My body, which is my possession but is not essentially me, as we'll actually see in this video, places me in a given situation in which I inherit certain values from my parents, from the church I grew up in, from my country, and from my culture. As I get older, I begin to break free from these values, and either I begin to discover who I really am, or I decide to create who I will be. I may have a crisis of identity at some point during this period, but I eventually must be me. This I do by making my own choices of what I will be, choosing my own politics, my own church, my own styles, my own music, my own sexuality, even my own gender, etc. Whatever it is that defines who I am, such things must be freely chosen by me. I understand life as a journey whose paths are self-chosen. If there is some, quote, out there, unquote, divine entity guiding me as I choose my path, it will communicate to me internally, personally. Along this journey, I may be assisted even by certain gurus, both human or not so human, or not. So, this is the first summation I've seen of what modern people essentially believe, and I believe it's personally very accurate, because at one point although I didn't hold to that exactly, I had that as a certain cultural reference point. And the reason why this woman here is saying this is because I think she presupposed that this is just how reality works. Well, it's not quite so simple, and we'll point this out as time goes by. So the light says I'm an atheist and I don't have that stand. Well, yeah, I mean, there's of course variance in opinion.
Oh, she's been brought up with this, she's never really questioned it, and now she's pushing it onto other people.
Well, actually, she made a blog, but okay. I mean, that would be like saying that I'm pushing my values onto you through my YouTube channel. And although I think that the culture at large would certainly benefit from it, I have no position of force to force you to do anything, and neither is she. But hey.
Yeah.
Who is Rachel Oates? That's the woman in the video. Oates.
With all this in mind, today we are going to be looking at a little selection of her blog posts, just kind of like picking a few bits out of them that are kind of interesting to talk about, and having a little chat about it, basically. I don't necessarily think this woman is especially dangerous. She's definitely not mean-spirited. She doesn't mean to do anything wrong, but I still think the fact she's spreading some of these messages as fact are worrying and worth talking about and discussing. Some people ask why look at these kinds of blogs, but I think it's very important to understand people with opposing views to you. I think it's very important to listen to them and understand where they're coming from.
Why would you want to understand someone who's well, I mean, obviously you need to understand someone who's indoctrinated, but I mean, as we will see through this video, I think it's very clear that she doesn't understand where this blogger is coming from. And I don't think she even really makes an attempt. Hopefully this video will edify her in some way if she watches this, because I'm going to make it explicitly clear what this woman is referring to, because as somebody in the online Christian community and somebody who has read quite substantially into the Christian tradition, I think I can answer that. And yes, that is a Lily Allen book in the background. I noticed that as I booted this up for the... as I booted it up. Yeah, it is a Lily Allen book. My mum used to play Lily Allen music all the time.
Even when you don't agree with them, it can be just as important to say why you don't agree with something as it is to say why you agree with something. You know, you need to understand those thoughts and feelings, be able to explain them to others. There might be a lot of you out there who read just her blog and think, oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, we will see.
But if I don't kind of give you the opposing view, or I don't tell you, hey, no, this is okay, or not just me, it could be anyone, then a lot of people will live their lives feeling like this is the only way, and it's not.
Well, I mean, Christianity, if you actually read into what it is, and you start studying the philosophy behind it, it becomes very clear that it is indeed the only way. Pluralism does not factor in.
There are so many different ways.
In fact, the very opinions that this woman is expressing, she probably doesn't know this, but this actually emerges out of the Protestant culture in which Britain was submerged for over 500 years. Well, nearly 500 years at this point.
Is to live your life. There's no one right or wrong way. And that...
Well, yeah, there are. It's the virtuous housewife for a reason. And we'll elucidate that as time goes on, because there are better times to explain this.
The message that I want to keep talking about in my videos and on my channel, and I don't want it to get repetitive, but it's so important that everyone knows that it's okay to find your own way in life and to figure things out for yourself. There's no one set of rules, there's no...
Well, actually I should probably make this clearer, right? You're obviously going to do things in different ways because you're a different person, but the moral rules themselves, the moral rules, the virtue in fact, is entirely the same for everyone. There is no difference in moral rules just by virtue of who you are as a person. There are, of course, going to be difference in approaches and application, of course, because human beings live in different places, but the principles themselves do not change.
One objective right or wrong way. You just need to figure things out for yourself. And
in fact, this is actually one of those things that we're instilled with from a very young age. In fact, indoctrinated, you could say. Or inculcated from the schools, right? And why do I say this? Well, because there's no real difference between her view on that and Christianity, except that she thinks that one is right and one is wrong. The same things were inculcated at a very young age into people, uncritically, because, children need to know things, and they don't know formal logic. They can't sit down, present some axioms, and translate them into results. They're children, so you have to instill certain things, and this is one of those examples. This pluralism wherein religion is simply just another uniform that you wear in the factory.
Sometimes you'll mess up, sometimes things will go wrong, and that's okay. It's something that might seem like common sense to some people, but it's something that so many people do need to hear.
Well, you see, the thing is that you find when you start digging more into religions, and indeed into ethnic groups, that it really isn't that sensical. In fact, for example, this Rachel Oates person here would probably have heard about the Black Lives Matter people, and how they say that they don't like colour blindness because it's denying a part of their identity. And yeah, that's true. Just pretending not to see colour is denying a part of someone's identity, and it's not a good thing to do because you're denying a part of a human being. And likewise, the culture at large denies the differences between religions and does exactly the same thing. Islam is not exchangeable with Christianity. Protestantism is not exchangeable with Catholicism. Sikhism is not exchangeable with Islam. They're not these just different flavoured groups with the same civic values. And so, and in many cases, they explicitly contradict each other. So, to pretend that we can all just hold hands and live happy clappy is just simply inaccurate if you actually read into the traditions. These traditions are mutually exclusive. Now, this isn't to say that you can't have friends in those groups. What I'm saying is that a formation of a culture based on this idea does not work, because they are mutually exclusive.
And that's why I'm going to keep talking about it. Anyway, enough of that. Let's have a look at some of these posts. I want to start with a post titled, "Finding Joy in a Life Devalued." Because unlike everything else that I read on her site and everything else I'm going to be talking about in this video, there's something here that I actually kind of partially, maybe a little bit agree with her on, or at least understand where she's coming from, and therefore have a little bit of sympathy for her because of... So she writes, and as we go on you will understand why I'm drinking wine. Not just because I enjoy the taste, but because to get through this...
I'm sorry, but I don't understand how you can drink white wine. Maybe it's that I had a lot of it at university.
God, you need something.
Have mercy.
So she writes, "I've been dealing with a great amount of opposition as of late. I've been making a greater effort to enhance myself spiritually and physically," which is amazing. That's something I can always applaud and always will applaud. Anyone who wants to better themselves and improve themselves and learn and grow, amazing. I always am going to 100% support that. As I develop my relationship with God, I've also been developing my femininity. Of course, there are some around me who are not as supportive. Multiple times a day I hear women say, "I need a better job," or "I need more hours at work." I've also been asked why I'm not pursuing higher education or a full-time job. So, like I say, I have mixed feelings about this. It does make me sad to see people judging other people's lives, and that might sound hypocritical to some of you, but I don't know, I feel like I need to explain this a little more, because that's the whole point of this video and me talking about these kinds of topics, is not to shame her way of life.
She'll contradict this in very short order.
It's to say, hey, don't shame other people's way of life, you know?
Well, you see, I'm going to make this point now, because I've already watched this. There's a difference between shaming the person in themselves and pointing out that a moral action is wrong. For example, sleeping around is an objectively bad idea and is objectively immoral. How do we know this? Through natural moral law. We know that the three things that come out of sex, that being primarily children, that's the biggest impact from sex, the bonding of partners, and thirdly, pleasure, we know that sleeping around makes the third one, the primary one, and it ignores the bigger two. And so, by definition, it's a bad act because it's disordered. It's incredibly imprudent. because it's pursued purely for the end of pleasure. And you can have those two results there inadvertently. And as she will probably profess, I don't know for certain, you don't want a child from a one-night stand. And it's often not a good idea to develop a relationship through a one-night stand. It's imprudent.
I'm trying to, once again, as I do in so many of my videos, make a point about women being allowed to make their own choices and live the life they want, and men as well, obviously, and non-binary people.
Well, yeah, there's another assumption there, because the whole non-binary thing, that's something that is instilled into our culture, but it exists in almost no other cultures. When they tend to talk about other examples of this and transgenderism and such, they generally have to point to African and Papua New Guinean tribes. This is far from a given in human history. But she assumes this is the midpoint. Just the basis of all thought.
Tripping over my words. Like, everyone. But yeah, no, everyone should be able to live the life they want, and...
Why? I mean, you are ultimately living in a system where... Let's take our own country, for example. There are 70 million people in this country. If everybody lives the life that they want, people are going to come to conflict, and there's not going to be resolution. We cannot just follow our own wills, because our wills often contradict each other across the whole society, first of all. And second of all, our own wills change so quickly, how can you simply live as you want? Now, that's not to say that people shouldn't have choice, of course, but there has to be a consideration of other people. And a pretty hefty one, especially considering how large society is.
This does include allowing women to be traditional housewives and stay-at-home mums if that's what they want. Of course, that's absolutely fine, and I'm never going to shame anyone for making that choice.
Like I said earlier, just keep watching.
I am, however, going to critique people who push that as being the only choice or the only right choice. My issue with her is purely her shaming of other women, not the life she chooses to live, and I want to make that as clear as I possibly can. That said, the comments she's receiving from others do worry me a little bit, because if people are telling her stuff like she needs to work more or get a better job or, put more hours in or whatever, it does make me wonder why they're saying that to her. Like, what?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why. It's because they're putting the job first. They think that the best thing she can spend her time with and the best thing she can get success out of is a job. It's a simple moral preference, as you yourself have, and as I have, and as in fact reality has, through the natural moral law.
The trigger, chances are it's not just coming out of nowhere. It makes me think, especially if this is coming from people she knows in her everyday life, like family, friends, people who care about her, it does make me think that maybe she can't currently support herself and she's not currently supporting herself, and that she's choosing to remain that way. And that's the bit that I have the issue with, her choosing that kind of life.
Well, it really depends what she wants, right? I think you're judging her choices based on something that you don't actually have adequate information on.
If this is the case, I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying...
In fact, if this woman is a housewife, she's putting in easily sufficient work taking care of a house and children.
If this is the case, I find it very difficult to have respect for someone who can help themselves and chooses not to. Someone who has the ability to do more, but would rather just get others to do it for them. Now, I've spoken a little bit about this before, and I feel like I didn't express myself well, and so people kind of took a little bit of issue with what I said, and I understand it because I didn't explain myself.
Now, I understand I'm not doing a very good job of this, but I'm trying to make the debate that's going on here a lot more clear in terms of language. Now, of course, being in a live stream situation, I can't do that to the extent I'd like to. And I know that if I were to write a proper response, it wouldn't get read. So, I'm going to try my best here.
Clearly enough. I guess what I want to try and say, and I'm going to try and be as clear as possible. I'm not judging anyone who needs help from anyone else, whether that be financial.
Talking of help, could you guys share this? Because apparently people didn't get the notification. if you could do it on Twitter or on Facebook or wherever, just to get more people on here, I would very much appreciate it.
Or otherwise. I'm not judging anyone who doesn't have a well-paying job or doesn't have the best possible job or whatever. I'm not judging people who can't get more hours at work or get a better education or anything like that. That's not at all what I'm judging. I understand that, and I completely respect that. Some people have health issues and need support from people. Some people...
I mean, I don't understand why you need to put all of this, like, boilerplate on top. Everyone knows that. Now, there's obviously going to be the one person in your comment section who will go, okay, so you don't like disabled people. You know what you do? You block them. There's no need. There's no need to put all this boilerplate on.
The economy is so screwed up that they need help from other people. Some people just have bad luck and they need help from other people. I respect that. I understand that. I would never judge that. What I have an issue with is a person who has opportunities to work or get an education or whatever and chooses not to because they're lazy.
I'll be honest with you, though. I don't understand why... I'd say maybe 80% of people... I don't understand why 80% of people go to university. Having just finished my degree in a pretty good STEM subject, I don't understand why most people go to university for humanities, for example, or social sciences, when they could just learn it from the books at home themselves. Now, with something like machine learning, like what I'm doing at the moment when I start my master's, and, I don't know, cryptography like I did for my bachelor's, right? You do need professional training for that. You do need to go go and do a degree for that. If you're going to study, I don't know, linear algebra, serious linear algebra, yeah, okay, go to university, find a professor of mathematics and learn that off of them. If you need to learn abstract algebra, right, like difficult subjects like that, by all means go to university, but most people don't need to do that. For example, with history, you don't need to know all of the modern historiography. You just go find the books, preferably the primary sources, hew your way through them, and just come to your conclusions. Now, you may not produce what the Academy deems to be good history, but it doesn't really matter, because the end of history, ultimately, is to learn how human beings think. That's the only reason, really, to know it beyond a sense of cultural heritage and such. It's to learn lessons.
Because they don't think it's their duty to do that. They'd rather leech off someone else. That's what I judge. Not people who don't have a choice, not people who need help, not people who ask for help, the people who don't need it.
In fact, actually, just to add on to what I was just saying, I have a very low view of humanities bachelor's degrees. In fact, most of the people that I knew in them, except for the exceptionally hard-working, aiming for academia types, were largely part-time alcoholics. And to be fair, I was as well for some of my degree, and my degree was actually serious. But, yeah, I do think that if you were in a bachelor's degree program and you're not seriously struggling, that you should probably be finding some sort of work, be it through YouTube, be it through doing contract work, which is what I've basically been doing, those first two, or through working in a shop, which I've also done. In fact, I worked in a nightclub for a little bit. Anyway, let's continue.
And demand it anyway. I hope that's a little bit clearer than I've, spoken about it in the past, because, yeah, I definitely didn't do a good enough job of expressing myself in other videos. I definitely know that. Anyway, I hope I'm kind of expressing that right and clearly. I hope. I don't know. Like I say, I'm not saying she's definitely doing that. It's just what it suggests, and if that's the case, it annoys me a little bit. But the bit that really gets to me and makes me think that's the case, rather than her just not having opportunities, is this next bit where she writes, "As for myself, I will continue to find joy in femininity and enhancing myself daily to be a more valuable woman in society." That's fine. Not valuable by how much money I make or how many degrees I have, but valuable in bringing back the femininity that society desperately craves. I find it difficult to find any value in bringing back femininity.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Okay, so I'm not laughing at the person, I'm laughing at the statement, right? I don't think she understands what femininity actually is. And I don't think most people understand what masculinity is either. So I'll give you a definition right here. So, male and female, they were created, right? People may, their soul may disagree with that, or their nous may disagree with that, which is where we get transgenderism from. But we still are ultimately endowed with male and female bodies, right? We can dispute whether or not people were born in the right body or not later on. But the thing is that innate to these male and female bodies is a set of faculties that are unique to one and the other. For example, male bodies, as in male sexual bodies, I'm not even attempting to address identity here, because I have to make that very, very clear, because I know that someone will try and jump on me for this. They have a different dimorphism. And also, as a result of that, as indeed this lady here who did biomed at some point and knows a bit of cognitive science will know, there are differences in the brain as well. So naturally that means that there are going to be different faculties for a person to improve in order to be more like what they are, right? Because, you can have a disability, you can have a defect. They call it, for example, erectile dysfunction. And we treat that, and that increases the functioning of the faculty of, well, you know what I mean. Now, masculinity is insofar as the faculties of a male person tends towards a masculine ideal, the platonic form of the man. And likewise, femininity is the same for the female. Now, we have had this issue over the last 60 years where the lines are kind of blurring. And we can see this through not only the contemporary debates that I don't think I need to enlighten anyone on, but also through straight up the way that people look. We're becoming less dimorphic, which is not good. And so therefore there needs to be a push to re-accentuate those faculties that are unique to men and women. So of course, society, or whatever society even means, of course reality craves a following of our purpose in that sense. It doesn't matter what people's opinions are. We exist insofar as our faculties are effective, and that includes those things that are unique to either sex.
I understand a woman raising kids is contributing a hell of a lot. It's something that I could not do, so hell of a lot of respect to...
I do truly hope you are in the 10% of women where that is genuinely the case.
Any parent. I understand a woman working is contributing. I even understand to some extent a woman supporting her husband so he can work is contributing.
Is that somehow less than a woman working for herself? What? There's nothing wrong with being a housewife. Right, actually, I'm going to lay this one down here because I've been thinking about it pretty much since I watched this video, right? There is this seemingly flawed idea that the New Testament, because of course she's responding to a Christian here, so I'm going to reference that somehow the New Testament, particularly St. Paul and St. Peter's epistles, are sexist because they tell wives to be subject to their husbands. And, they've made plenty of arguments about this. Now, what does feminism argue? What does second wave feminism argue, as they call it? You're better off having a career. Now, what would a career entail? It would entail being subject to your boss. Or in the case where you established your own business, you would be subject to your customers. Now, let's consider this. You can be subject to your husband. You can be subject to your boss. And you can be subject to your customers. Now, what does one have that the other two don't? Well, generally speaking, although I really doubt that this... it's becoming increasingly less and less common, you would expect that your husband would actually love you. You would expect that your husband would be willing to die for you, because that's the natural end of man. Now, a boss is under no obligation to do this. Or he is not obliged to do this, although... Very interestingly, you see this this kind of thing happen where a manager will marry one of his underlings, and it tends to be a woman who's the lower position and the man in the higher position. But in and of itself, there is no reason why the boss should love his employee. And likewise with customers. Customers don't care for that. So what I'd ask these sorts of feminist women is if they've ever considered that through working, say, for a large corporation in a high burned position, high burning position. It's rather late and my brain is kind of fried from digging up the garden and programming. You can have a high flying position in a corporation, but no one loves you. No one is there to die for you. All you get is a number on your paycheck at the end of the month. Why would you choose that over a husband? Or perhaps becoming a nun, right? In fact, that's one thing that she doesn't mention here. There was an interview between Matt Fradd and this Byzantine Catholic monk, and she was a physics teacher. She did her degree in physics, and then she became a monk after being a teacher for a little bit. And her the people she was working with started mocking her for it, because it's like, well, it's a waste of time. All you're doing is sitting there and praying. I mean, these people didn't value prayer, so they thought that she was wasting her life. But, I mean, of course, we know that that's not the case. But, like, why not go to a monastery and devote your life to God as a woman? I mean, the community there is supposed to love you. Your abbess there is supposed to love you. Why would you not pursue that? Why would you not sacrifice, perhaps, a little bit of autonomy in order to be loved? And this is what I've never understood, and I truly suspect that that's because feminists have never seen a husband truly love their wife, which is a sad reality. And that's why I think that there's so much divorce around, because there's a lot of men who are infatuated with their wives. They're attracted on a very base level to their wives, but they don't really they're not willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for them, as they're supposed to.
But a woman simply bringing back femininity, what is that contributing? Because I'll be honest, this woman, having read about her current situation, she's not pregnant, doesn't have kids, she's not even married yet.
She's not even married. So? So what?
She's not living with the fiancé, but...
Well, I mean, if you actually read more into Christian blogs, you'll find that cohabiting is actually really verboten. You're not supposed to do that. So, yeah, she shouldn't be doing that.
She won't work or get an education or support herself. So she's clearly, essentially, leeching off someone in her life, saying...
Well, I mean, she might be providing something that person very much likes. You don't know, like... For example, if I had a housemate, say a female housemate, that did all of the cooking and cleaning or whatever, and, was just generally very nice company, and, we got on really, truly well, I wouldn't mind paying her rent. There wouldn't have to be anything else to that. I mean, you don't know any of this. You're making a lot of rash judgments, I find, on very little basis. It would be like going through my channel and making assumptions about my life. Now, you can come to some conclusions, undeniably, but there are some things that you would never, ever see. Because I choose not to share them, and sometimes I deliberately obfuscate them.
That she's creating value.
Yeah, actually, as Morchigese Infiltrator says, true masculinity is found at the foot of the cross. Yeah, exactly. It is being able to, without even a second thought, being able to be nailed to the cross for the sake of your wife. To be willing to be in agony on the cross for, I believe it was 6 hours. I think it was at the 6th hour that he... Actually, I think it was the 6th hour that he was nailed, and on the 9th he died. Either way, 3 to 6 hours on the cross in unimaginable agony, having the people around you mocking you, and having to provide for where your mother is supposed to live in the calmest possible way. That is what a husband is supposed to suffer for his wife. But we don't see that anymore. And I mean, I can understand why there are feminists that exist, because they don't see this in the men. And it's tremendously sad.
By bringing back femininity. That's what annoys me. Anyway, moving on a little bit. I'm gonna need more wine for this. Things start getting really bad with the post No, you don't have to be strong and independent. I don't know what's happening with the little air quotes there. She has a strong opening, right? While there is nothing wrong with self-sufficiency, great, I like that. Leave it there. Don't write any more of the post. Just, that's fine.
Well, I mean, you're never going to be self-sufficient. Even if you're running your own business, you are still dependent on your customers. I'm just reading what ZL's writing. Also, the people insulting her in the chat, don't do that. That's uncharitable. It's sinful, in fact. Cut it out.
That's enough, that's all you need. But damn it, she goes on. While there is nothing wrong with self-sufficiency, the notion that women should be praised for how independent of a man she is, this is unhealthy. Is it though?
Yes. It is unhealthy for someone to pretend that they're somehow independent. Even men shouldn't do this.
Young women are being trained to believe that they are better women and stronger if they can do it all by themselves. If she can pay her own bills, if she can build her own career, if she can raise children all by herself without a father present. Well, yeah, I believe those women are strong and they should be applauded.
I think, to be honest, if you are raising children alone without a father deliberately, that's incredibly irresponsible. Now, of course, it's one thing if the husband dies or runs away or something disgusting, but if you are deliberately going out there and having children out of wedlock so you can raise them on your own to prove how strong you are, there's something fundamentally disordered in that. You're depriving those children of a father that they need. That's vile if you do that. That's vile. There are so many men who grow up without fathers for reasons that are along these lines, or perhaps you lack self-control on a night out and you meet a guy, right, and that conceives the child, and because you're not so low as to abort the child, you raise it on its own, right, instead of trying to either contact the father or trying to find someone else to look after the child with. That's depriving the child of something it needs, particularly if it's a male kid, right? It needs a father figure, and we are reaping the benefits of this as we speak. There is nothing strong in going out and irresponsibly conceiving a child and then pretending that you're strong and independent because you can raise it on your own.
Men who do it all alone are also strong and should be applauded. I think non-binary people who do it all alone are strong and should be applauded. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
In fact, this actually really bugs me, right? It really does not matter if you're strong and independent. There are some people who are like that by nature, right? They are people who can go out and establish businesses. There are people who are high-powered execs by default, and that's fine. That is their nature. But not everyone is that. And this is something that I've learned at university, because I assumed, based on where I was raised, I mean, I went to very good schools, to be honest, and I assumed the average was just this kind of entrepreneurial type or academic type, right? And I found out very quickly when I went to university that wasn't the case. And initially I resented these people because I believed that they were lesser than me. But then as I grew up and stopped being such a child, I realised that there are different people for different things. There are some people in this world who will never be self-sufficient. There are people in this world who will never be independent. There are people in this world that will never be strong. These people with Down syndrome, you see. But they still nonetheless contribute to the society, because not only do they give us a way to provide charity to them, to provide true love to them, which ultimately makes us better, they're also human beings. And by virtue of being a human being, they are in the likeness and image of God. There is a certain divinity to the human form. And
or saying that, or thinking that, or acknowledging that those people are strong. I'm someone who is entirely financially independent and has a career that I built up myself, and it's tough. And some people do that and raise kids. It's insane that some people can do that. They're amazing and strong.
Well, I mean, that may well be the case, but surely there's a time when you decide, I'm a single mother having a high-powered career and children at the same time. maybe it's time I find a father so that these children can have a balanced life. Maybe just because you think that you can have both, maybe it takes growing up a little bit to realise that although you can have both in a very superficial sense, it's going to seriously impact the one that matters more, and frankly it's the children. The children matter infinitely more than any career that either you or I can possibly have. Because they are human beings who are granted to us to be formed in a way that they can contribute to the world and also live good lives, right? Like, whatever you earn, that's a number. That's a number that you use to buy food, and of course you need that. But you should put children first, obviously. Now, if that involves getting a career, then well, hey ho.
Why wouldn't we applaud that? It's incredible. The thing is, she seems to imply, and you'll see this as the blog post goes on, that if these women are strong, that's somehow saying that other types of women aren't strong. I'm saying women, like it's got a G on the end. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm doing this. But it's like she's implying that, oh, well, if you think these women are strong, other women must not be as strong.
Well, in a certain sense, yes. Because if you just take strong in itself, that's kind of a spectrum, right? And it's defined by certain behaviours. Now, if we define strength through the behaviour, to be honest, strong and strength is such an imprecise term that there's no sense in me making that argument.
No, it's so important to note that there's not just one kind of strong. There's not just one kind of strong woman or strong person.
Well, actually, there's 7 kinds of strength. There's prudence, there's temperance, there's faith, hope, charity. There's justice. It's prudence, justice. I'm trying to remember the natural virtue. So it's justice, prudence, temperance, and what's the other one? Someone in the chat's going to get it. I know it. Man, I'm drawing a blank on something I should know. Either way, there are virtues. That's what strengths are. Virtues are habits, operative habits, according to Aquinas. And I think it's the first question of the Secunda Secundae Partis. Right, these are operative habits that build up the human being. These are strength, in a very literal sense. That's really bugging me now. Justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. Thank you, Puddle Clog. I should have known that. One of the last things I wrote for my degree was a random story generator based on the 7 cardinal virtues. I should have known that. Gains. Someone says gains. Yeah.
Listen, so many air quotes in this video. It's just, my fingers are going to cramp up at this rate. Saying that an independent woman is strong does not mean that a woman who is in a relationship or being helped by her family or relatives or whatever, or
to answer John Nathan, no, chastity is part of temperance.
Friends, isn't strong. She writes, "You're not a better or stronger woman because of how independent you are."
Yes, that's true.
You're not supposed to do it all by yourself. Kind of annoyed me a little bit, that line, I'll be honest. It's not a matter of being better or stronger than anyone else. But that said, if you do want to compare yourself to like your past self and say, well, I feel stronger than I used to be, or this was difficult but I feel better for having done it myself.
Who cares how you feel? Well, I could feel like I don't know, I have a greater level of faith, but that doesn't have any bearing on whether I do or not. I might feel like I'm stronger, but there's it doesn't matter, right? If I can't go and say squat 150 kilos, right, and I think that I'm like so much more strong than I was the last time I went to the gym, which was 4 months ago because of the lockdown, right? I mean, if I can't actually show results, then what does it matter if I feel it?
There's nothing wrong with that. You should be allowed to be proud of yourself and feel good about yourself.
Well, I wouldn't say proud, because pride blinds.
There's nothing wrong with that, and you shouldn't allow anyone to tell you that it is or isn't what you're supposed to be doing. She goes on to write, I am
In fact, actually, we let the schools do that, so that's not strictly true.
Criticizing the increasingly popular theme of being strong and independent among women. Don't need that comment. Sorry, this blog is also so full of typos and grammatical errors, like my brain is like anyway. It is harmful because it fosters a mentality that men and women do not need each other. If you research statistics on increasing single-parent households and female breadwinner households, you can find evidence of my claim. Still don't see why this is a bad thing.
Okay, let me explain why the single-parent household epidemic is a problem. You produce children that are poorer, you produce children that are more mentally ill, you produce children that are actively less intelligent as a result of the economic deprivation. In fact, I'll give you a very personal example. My grandfather was born, in theory, to a single mother. Well, actually, yeah, to a single mother. And he was in such a serious position of poverty during the Second World War that it stunted his growth. Now, for reference, I am 6'1". My dad is about the same, and his half-brother is about, I'd say about 5'8". He is 5 foot. Now, if you want to pretend that this doesn't somehow have some impact on intellect or mental faculties, then you're flying in the face of common sense isn't that common. What reason would dictate? I don't like to say common sense because some people say, oh, it's just common sense, and then it's just not true. And this is the result of single parenthood, right? Aristotle said, I believe, in the Politics, that the basis of the society at large is family. And you can only have families with a father and a mother. Now, you have robbed, through the production of these households, the child of one of those integral parts. You are putting them seriously on the back foot. That is what is wrong with it. Don't you think that a child might deserve a father and mother on an innate level? I mean, this is kind of more of a ramble about, I'll do it anyway, yeah. This is more of a ramble about Enlightenment philosophy, but they'll always do the thing where they derive natural rights from a man on an island, right? Well, how did the man get there in the first place? Was he just zapped there? Well, I mean, if he were Adam, he'd be getting his marching orders from God. But we'll ignore that for the moment. No, he got there because he had a father and a mother. Now, how we as a society can pretend that having one of these key elements missing in the life of the child that was produced by such is somehow laudable is it disgusts me. Now, as I have made very clear, if there is a legitimate reason why one or the other isn't there, for example, a lot of the times husbands and wives would die, right? And fair enough. Entirely understandable. Entirely understandable. If you're one of the poor women whose husband has died on campaign or something, for example, right? Society should support you, and they do. But if you're just going to go around and prove you're strong and independent because you can get pregnant by a random guy and then sit in a flat, work a part-time job that barely covers the bills, and then deliberately deprive your child of a father, then that action in and of itself, I'm not, like I say, we should not judge people in themselves. We cannot say that this person is bad because that is down to God to judge. But the action in itself is highly immoral. That speaks of supreme pride to do that.
And also, the evidence of her claim is simply there are more single-parent households, there are more female breadwinner
It's because in the Christian communities it's taken as a given that that's a bad thing.
Households. That's it. It doesn't say they're bad. It definitely doesn't say why they're bad. You see, women who have this...
Okay, so for example, if I were to write... let's say I were to write a blog post about... I don't know, one of the sins against the Sixth Commandment. I'd presuppose that you knew what the Sixth Commandment was. I'd presuppose the constitution of sin, which is the privation of being through disobeying God's will. I presuppose a lot of things, and likewise this lady has, of course, as well.
I got this type of attitude. Often reject help or acts of chivalry in fear of appearing weak or helpless. Women also then complain of men who want them to pay on dates, or their general 50-50 mentality.
Now, frankly, I don't get this particular point. It's never really bothered me either.
But fail to realise it's their own attitudes that encourage this. Oh, she's claiming women are like, I don't know, shouting for a double standard. Saying women complain about men who want them to pay our dates or their general 50-50 mentality. I don't know any woman who is all, yes, I'm a feminist, I got this, and refuses to pay on dates. It's weird, I don't know.
There is the odd woman that does this, but it's not very common. I always just pay because, you know, I don't like playing the 50-50s game. Because if I'm dating someone, I have at least considered that I might marry them at some point, and when marriage occurs, the two are made one, and so there isn't really yours and mine. In fact, St. John Chrysostom makes a very good point about this in his homily on Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 through 33, I think, when he's talking about women being subject to their husbands, right? You know, because the two become one, right? There's no real mine and yours.
I also don't get why that's such a big thing. It's like a huge thing just in general, and people argue over it, and and I'm like, look, if you are on a date, it's two people spending time together. Why not allow...
Also, guys, don't date. You need to court. Sorry, I just thought I'd slide that in there.
One person to get it one time and one person to get it another time. Why not go 50-50? Blah, 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 whatever. For me, I'm like, if I've enjoyed spending time with someone, I'll go halves on the bill because, you know, that's me saying, hey, thanks for spending your time with me. I appreciate you. I don't get why it's a big thing. I don't get why it's a gendered thing. I'm sure gay couples don't have this issue. I'm sure if you go on a date with a non-binary person, you don't have these issues. I don't get why it's only men and women who seem to argue over something as stupid as paying a bill. A man thrives when he feels needed, useful, and valued by a woman. Fathers, brothers, husbands, sons all love to feel needed and important in their communities. A man thrives when he feels needed, useful, and valued by a woman.
Yes.
Pretty sure most gay men would disagree.
I don't know, I think even they would, to be honest. There's something about being needed by anyone really that's good, or being better yet loved by someone. I don't like the way the blog phrases it.
Also, again, I'd like a little evidence for this, please. And why does this...
What do you wanna do you want like a scientifically cited journal article that proves that men like it when they're wanted? No, you don't need that. I can tell you, as a straight white male, that yeah, we actually kind of like that.
Supposedly only apply to men. I'm pretty sure everyone thrives when they feel, you know, useful and valued by anyone.
Well, I mean, there's a difference when it's someone that you want to be married to, right? Because there's, of course, spheres. You know, I'm not going to care quite so much when I'm needed by perhaps a random homeless person as I would with, say, my mother, or perhaps some of the girls I've dated in the past. Like, there's obviously there's a certain scale to it.
Not just a human thing. It's definitely not a gender thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with embracing your need for and dependence on masculinity. Oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, men and women naturally complement each other. Is that somehow controversial? Like, women needs masculinity. Women need masculinity. Men need femininity. They balance each other out, right? There's a reason why. It's not just Christianity that has this belief in, you know, Eve coming from the rib. In fact, in Plato's Symposium, I believe it's Alcibiades discusses how man and woman were once one creature and they were hewn in two. I think it was one of the more esoteric writers of 20th century philosophy described a certain hermaphrodism to the relationship between men and women. Now, he did it in a very strange way, but it sort of gets the point, right? That there is a certain, like, you can't see my hands, but there's a certain, like, joining together that occurs between man and woman because they're mutually complementary.
You're just a weak little woman who can't do anything without a man.
Well, I'd like to see you have a another generation of people without a man. I will say that. And likewise, men shouldn't pretend to be independent either.
Sorry. Look, everyone needs other people sometimes. Reliance on another person or people is normal. It's fine. It's nothing to be looked down on. But also, dependence on a person or people all the time, encouraging dependence on a person or people all the time, is so dangerous.
I think she's been reading Ted Kaczynski, guys. Because, you know, I need to depend on the electrical engineers down at the power station all the time so I can stream to you. I need to depend on the gigantic infrastructure of the modern world to pretty much survive at all. If one of these cogs breaks, then a lot of us are going to suffer really badly. And we kind of half saw this with the toilet paper shortage. Only three days worth of food in the shops, and you know, the supply chain logistics, right? It's more profitable, so they're going to do it that way, right? But it does certainly indicate that we are going to be dependent on people all at once. Now, of course, she doesn't mean it in that sense. She means it in a relational sense. And yeah, you do need time away from other people sometimes. You sometimes need time to sort of, you know, chill. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be tied to someone for life, necessarily.
Let's be realistic. So, yeah, on this point, I have to disagree with her. Women who cling to their strong and independent attitudes are often taken advantage of. They are taken advantage of by narcissistic men, by their employers, and by societal standards.
Yes, they are!
Just to translate that to normal person for you, if you're strong enough to not be taken advantage of, I'm going to say you're being taken advantage of because it makes me feel better about myself.
No. First of all, you wanted to honestly understand where she was coming from, and this would be an indication that you don't. Secondly, if you reckon that you are actually strong and independent, which is never the case, as I've just shown, then you are going to be blinded by pride. Now, there are two things that blind human beings more than anything else. The first is lust. That is why there's, you know, the relationship situation at universities is so poor, because people are just letting their lust fly everywhere. Right, so there's constant breakups, constant cheating, you know. Like, I've been at university for long enough to know that. I mean, I've seen it so many times, and it's not pleasant. But the other one is pride. Because if you think that you are truly strong and independent, right, if you think that you could just detach at any moment from a person and that you're not incredibly vulnerable at every given moment, right, you can die at any moment. You don't know. I could die while making this stream. I don't know. And you don't know whether you will die while watching it. Because only God knows, right? And to pretend that you're somehow strong and independent is asking for that kind of trouble, you know? It doesn't continually repeat in the scriptures for no reason that the prideful are torn down. This isn't simply a Christian thing. This is something that happens to everyone. And I think every tradition is aware of this. So of course women who reckon that they are strong and independent are going to be taken advantage of by narcissistic men. Because they're never truly strong and independent.
So if you actually want to avoid being taken advantage of using my messed up logic, you should allow yourself to be taken advantage of, because it's not really being taken advantage of if...
I mean, you see, putting yourself under someone else's power, as we do every day through the state and through our employers and through using YouTube, that's not being taken advantage of. That's trusting in someone. Now, the only time it's being taken advantage of is when you trust in someone who has bad intentions. And I think she's never mind. I don't know where I was going with that besides that.
You're asking people to use you. Is it? Hashtag tradwife logic. Apparently.
Yeah, there's actually a difference between your reckoning of yourself and your actual self. There's endless memes about this. For example, I could reckon that I am the most fit person on the planet, but in truth, I could probably do I don't know. It's been a long time in lockdown, so I could do a 4 or 5 mile jog, right? But I'd struggle. But if I thought I could do a marathon and I tried it, I'd just get completely trounced, because reality would destroy me. Truth. In other words, what we ought to believe, which is truth, is how is our thoughts insofar as they correspond to reality. Now, you will never be strong and independent in the sense that you think that you will somehow be invincible against these narcissistic men. There's no reason to be prideful at all, because it's simply not conducive to reality. So just don't do it.
When you create a generation of women who pride themselves in how independent they can be, this is what happens. An increase in single mother households.
Yes.
Increase in divorce.
Yes.
Wives being led to believe they don't need their husbands and shouldn't.
Yes. In fact, you're proving this, that particular point.
Men taking advantage of women by expecting them to be providers and breadwinners.
Well, that's one way. There are much more insidious ways.
As opposed to women taking advantage of men. That's okay. Other way around. Sexism.
Well, I mean, it's a blog for women, and so it's going to assume good on the part of the woman. So why would you need to mention that?
Men losing their drive or instinct to protect women. Why am I trying to say prevent women? Well,
that sounds like the kind of thing I'd put into a meme.
Freudian slip. Again, to translate this into normal person, this means it's bad because men don't want to protect women who don't need or want protecting, and
they don't need or want protecting. Okay, so you see, if we didn't have the society right now that we have with police and things, the natural instinct would be to be protected by your husband. But since you and I have never grown up in that, we don't know what that's truly like. Now, I've known people who have grown up in that sort of environment. I've known people from Nigeria, I've known people from Cameroon who have grown up in that sort of environment. There's none of this mentality in those people who have grown up in the poor areas of those countries, because they know that there is no police coming. And so you need an ally, and especially with women who you yourself have to admit are, generally speaking, physically weaker than men. Right? Especially with women, they need it. And even individual people, they need groups.
So, even though that means everyone's getting what they want, I still want to argue with it because it's different and that confuses
No, it's not because
me.
It's not because it confuses you. It's because what the modern world generally wants, and what you have just preached there, is going to reduce society to almost nothing. Now, earlier on, I was talking about how single parent households produce children that are, generally speaking, weaker. They are less qualified. They are less healthy. Right? Do you think that this is not going to have some sort of massive knock-on effect on the productivity of society, and indeed its weakness in comparison to others? Do you think that if we all did our own wills, and these all ran into each other, and because we believe that we can be strong and independent and less arrogant, we might try to override other people's wills, right? Do you think this might not lead to conflict? Do you think that this might not lead to not only a weaker society, but also a less united one? In fact, we've actually seen this. We see this constantly. In fact, what the majority of people want is wrong. It's false.
To end this little blog post, apparently, while it is very courageous when a woman is able to provide the needs of herself and her family, we must not encourage this standard. And now to finish the video, let's take a look at some wonderful gender-based stereotypes that are pretty absurd, because we haven't had enough of them so far, okay? And what kind of video would this be without some gender stereotypes? In the post, men don't even want housewives anymore! Exclamation mark.
Well, that's not true.
Our blogger writes, someone directly messaged me to tell me, a woman by the way, that my message was pointless because men don't want housewives anymore. They want...
Sorry guys, in the chat, would you like to meet a nice woman and raise a family with a housewife? I'm gonna ask you to put a 1 there if you haven't already. I know there's actually people watching this who have rather large families going. So 1's in the chat if you want that, put a 2 if you don't. If you would like a woman who is decidedly not like that, then put a 2.
women who go to work. Initially, I was irritated at her comments, but then I realised she was right. Just as Eve deceived Adam in the beginning, feminists have not only managed to deceive women, but men also.
Based. Yeah, a bunch of ones in the chat. Yeah, yes. There's a little bit of a lag, so I'm not always seeing them as it goes, you know. Yeah, see, a bunch of ones.
Oh, damn feminists. A lot of men have become effeminate and lack the desire to provide and protect. Oh, for God's sake, like, seriously. A man whose wife or girlfriend works is not effeminate. And what does effeminate even mean?
Okay, so you can tell that she doesn't. She's.
Oh God, it's so stupid. And even if they are effeminate, why is that a bad thing?
Oh come on, you know why it's a bad thing, and I can tell you know innately in your bones that you know this. But for the sake of argument, I'll explain what effeminacy is. Effeminacy is the inability to set down pleasure for the sake of preserving or doing the arduous good. I'm getting this citation from Father Chapter. Now, what would this involve? Being able to put down the video games to do the washing. That would be an example of something you might have seen. Digging the garden instead of watching YouTube. Being able to work instead of watching Netflix. Now, why is it a bad thing that there are all these effeminate men running around? Not only is there not enough being done, but also on the already kind of borderline men, you see more extreme instances of this. Now, let me present an example that I know scares a lot of women. Because, understandably, it's very scary and it's very disgusting. Now, suppose a man was so interested and so trapped in his own pleasure that he was not interested in your dignity. Suppose a man you were with had that attitude because he was effeminate. What would that lead to? Now, she's about to say, oh, I guess I'd want an effeminate man. Well, if you take it to that logical conclusion, I don't think you would. I think you'd want a man who would be willing to do the arduous good. Because this is like serious stuff. This isn't just like playground insults. Being unable to withhold your own pleasure for the sake of doing something arduous but is good is something that not only it builds all civilizations. It doesn't just build, you know, like basic mud huts. It's built everything that you see around you. Because a man or a woman was able to offset the arduous, the pleasure to do something that was good. You know, I can't remember who said this, but they said the mark of a truly virtuous man is someone who buries an acorn knowing that he will never survive to see the oak. And that is what we don't have now. We don't have men who are willing to build houses they will never live in. And that's the epitome of, you know, virtue. Because you are doing such an arduous good that you will never see the fruit of, and you're nonetheless able to offset the pleasure. They used to spend hundreds of years, now of course Americans haven't seen this, but they used to spend hundreds of years building huge cathedrals, huge beautiful cathedrals across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, that was because people were less effeminate. They were willing to spend their entire lives working on a building that they may never see. That's how important this effeminate thing is. This isn't just some like playground insult towards men who might not be as forceful as others. This is like civilization-defining stuff.
Seriously, what a lot of these women describe as an effeminate man sounds pretty damn good to me, I'll be honest.
As we know, I don't think you would.
Meanwhile, last blog post we're going to look at... Oh, God. This list. Okay. In a list of masculine traits you might exhibit, we are warned that apparently women with overly masculine tendencies have a much harder time working at their femininity. Most modern women do not even realise how masculine their behaviour is.
In fact, a lot of these are just bad habits generally. But you see, this is why I don't know this for certain, but I have a suspicion that the woman that she's responding to is a Protestant, because Protestants don't really have the same level of detail in their philosophies, and that's why there's a lack of preciseness in the language. I mean, there are obvious exceptions to this, people like William Lane Craig, but this is just a general trend I'm observing. Now that may well be rash judgment, but I don't know. That's just a guess. I don't know for certain.
Whether you want to attract a masculine mate or simply want to change your behaviour, here is a brief list of unfavourable masculine behaviours in women. Cursing.
Yeah, that's just a bad habit, generally speaking.
An inappropriate conversation.
Yes.
Especially in public.
Yeah, that's a bad habit, yeah.
Excessive sarcasm. Walking ahead of your husband.
Okay, so I'm actually going to read out the ones that she's skipped over. So we've got excessive sarcasm, which is bad for everyone. Because, you know, the voice that we possess is there to speak truth and to edify people. If we play games with that, then we are misusing it. Now, of course, we all do this. But we shouldn't pretend that it's a good thing when we do that. We don't change the rules because we like doing something. Being unnecessarily loud and boisterous. Yeah, definitely. Interrupting someone while they are speaking. Yes, that's just general behaviour. That's just general manners.
Overtaking his presence. Yes, women, make sure when you walk, always stay 5 steps behind the man so he knows he's in charge. You don't want him thinking you're his equal.
I mean, the walking ahead of your husband thing, that's an oddly specific thing, but I can kind of see what she means. Like, if a woman is leading you somewhere, then that does kind of offset the balance there. But, I mean, it's not really something that bothers me. That's a very nitpicky thing. That's kind of ridiculous. I'd never expect something like that.
Constantly trying to dominate situations or men in positions of authority.
Yes, that's just bad behaviour from anyone. Because they are in positions of authority for a reason, and so you show them respect.
Who would do that? Arguing or inappropriate bantering with groups of men?
Yeah, there's male humour and there's female humour.
There are ways to share your opinions with men that are more feminine and charming. Paying for men on dates. Don't you ever. The I don't need a man mentality as a whole. Yes, women, it's feminine to lie to yourself.
Well, I mean... Okay, so let's examine this. You do need a man if you want to continue, you know, if you want to have children ever. You'll probably need a man in a business situation at some point if you want to sell something. You're probably going to need a man if you're going to work at any company. Or just, you know, for the sake of the food you're eating. You're going to need a man at some point regardless, even if you don't get married, right? Now, I understand that's unnecessarily nitpicking, but still. This belief that somehow we are these atomized individuals is something that needs to die a very brief and very quick death.
With your legs apart. Such a stupid one, sorry.
I don't understand that. I was actually watching this with a girl from Canada, a Pakistani Muslim, a former Muslim woman, and she said that this is a really big deal apparently. But yeah, I don't know. I never really noticed it.
Okay. Drinking alcohol directly from the bottle. In my upbringing, women were to drink beer from a glass, not the bottle itself. To each their own.
I mean, that's just table manners, although I do drink from the bottle.
Okay, this one I actually agree with. It is incredibly masculine to drink beer from the bottle. When you're a classy, feminine woman like me, we do white wine. What is wrong with me? And on that note, the next thing that apparently is far too masculine for any woman is drunkenness. So, on that...
I must admit, right, like, guys will get drunk and they'll do stupid things, obviously, but, like, particularly white girls getting drunk. I mean, white girl drunk is a saying. It's just... It damages the dignity of a woman to do that. And it also damages the dignity of a man as well, which is why everyone should avoid it.
No, let's hope this blogger does not watch my tipsy self in this video. And finally, pursuing men...
She probably will.
Or approaching men in an overtly sexual and flirtatious manner.
Yes! 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 Like sometimes when I'm just sitting in a bar talking to a woman, I just want to get to know the woman as a person, and instead she's just doing all of this silly nonsense. It's like, listen, love, you're really nice. I want to get to know you. I don't need you, like, you know, touching my leg or something. I just want to talk to you. I just want to have a conversation.
is apparently a masculine trait. Classy women know how to show interest without being aggressive or overly...
In fact, actually, when men do it, it's... I don't know how it appears to women, so I'll let women, give me the impression that they get off men being overly flirtatious, right? But I know when women do it, it's extremely unattractive. Because it's like, I'm trying to get to know you as a person. I'm not trying to, pick you up for the night. I'm trying to get to know you because you're a human being.
Sexual. Yes, because why would you want someone who you're sexually interested in to know that you're sexually interested in them?
Well, because they can normally discern it without you making it really obvious. First of all, and second of all, there's a time and a place for everything. And I'm sorry, but 11 p.m. in a Wetherspoons is not the time. Especially when I've just met you. Or when any guy has just met you, because, frankly, if they're the kind of guy that is going to acquiesce to that kind of thing, they are the aforementioned effeminate men that I've just mentioned, because they're just going to seek after pleasure for the sake of it, like that, without any sort of proper consideration. In fact, this is a problem with people generally, and especially with women. There's not really much discernment that goes on in that regard. They just sort of make a split-second decision. Like sometimes I've been on a date with a girl for like 45 minutes, and she will just like come out with something incredibly vulgar like that. Like, love, I've just met you. I really like you. I just want to talk to you. Okay, I don't want to have discussions about sharing beds and stuff. I just want to have a conversation like a normal person. This is actually something that really bugs me. I hope you can tell.
So, what I think we can take away from this list is that I am a masculine, weak woman who will never find a man. And that I'm not strong, I'm not independent, something, there's nothing good about me, blah blah blah, I'm gonna die alone, cue the cat lady comments. That's about all I have to say for now, although I do have a huge list of links and other blog posts, not only from this Virtuous Femininity blog, but from...
Pano Kostoros says, let's be spontaneous adventures. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, it's just... Like, you could be truly loved and have a loving family. You could have all of these things, and instead you would rather have, getting I don't know, having 25 shots of vodka, right? I mean, I used to kind of live that life, right? Like, my record on terms of pints was 25 pints, right? You could have that life where you're loved and where you can think straight, or you could just dull out the pain with alcohol and meaningless sex. And it's tremendously depressing. In fact, this is one of the things that really bothers me about university, right? Because I went there and just the misery of the women. It's like, sometimes you'll meet them in a nightclub and you'll be talking to them after a while. And like, I mean, it's obviously the odd one, it's not all of them, but they'll be like, you'll be like seeing, when you see those sad animals trapped in the zoo, right? They're just like kind of like trying to put on a bit of a show, but they're really miserable, right? Like, I'm obviously not likening them that in that sense, right? But it's just the tremendous misery, the overpowering misery, because there's so many girls out there that think that they will just be loved if they put out to the right guy. And I remember there was this girl actually I knew very well, and I still know her very well, and I sat in her house for about 4 hours talking to her, and I was trying to sort of scale things down in that respect, and I left after about 4 hours when she I've got to cook dinner, and we looked at each other for about, it felt like an eternity, and there was a mixture. I'll never forget it. There was this mixture of anger that she'd been put down, because when I'd gone through the door with a cup of coffee, she'd put her hand along my face, right? Yeah, but we're looking at each other, and there's a mixture of this anger at being rejected and this drooping feeling, this just complete loss of enthusiasm, because I wasn't going to do that. And she really wanted me to. I think because I showed that I cared. I really do care about her. But I never did it. And she died and shut the door with quite a heft. I think she went off and cried herself. Because she thought that, you know, she could find her way through that kind of behaviour to something. Somewhere where I guess she was loved. But I wouldn't do that because I'm not going to. You never build something good out of a sin.
Plenty of other blogs that I could talk about and want to talk about, all with this kind of like trad wife, traditional wife, whatever theme. There's a feminine living.
You know, I find it very interesting that you're attracted to that kind of thing, because if it were purely something that needed to be refuted once, you'd just make the one video, right? But you're not. I mean, this is probably why I'll do more streams like this, responding to videos, not only because it gives me something to focus on in the streams rather than just talking about some abstract topic for an hour, but also because I think that there's a lot of people that can be reached out to, first of all, and second of all, because there's a lot of really serious errors out there that need to be, frankly, corrected.
Tradition in action, and don't forget Housewife Diary as well, which has the tagline, "I belong in the kitchen." There are some gems on that one. Yeah, it's been an interesting night for me. There's a reason I've been drinking a lot of wine, as I've read far too much of these blogs. God, why did I do this to myself? In all honesty, right, I thought I've had a really kind of intense couple of days. So I'm working on this video that I asked you guys if you wanted on Twitter, and you're all like, yes.
Oh boy, you guys are going to love this one.
Please do it. And basically it's debunking the kind of MGTOW, incel, red pill view of the science of pair bonding. And I have read so many like scientific journals the last few days, mostly talking about pair bonding, the neuroscience of pair bonding in prairie voles and meadow voles and
I'm going to give you a pretty... In fact, you will probably want to look into this. And I'm referring to the woman in this video because I really do suspect that she's going to sit and watch this. Yeah, you don't want to really be going after that because the people who actually know about pair bonding, they're not going to make much reference to the science per se, although they can do. It's a lot easier to argue from the historical record regarding that. And many sociologists, in fact did, until the marching through of the institutions, as Anton Gramsci describes it.
Sets and tamarins and various chimps and some other things I can't remember off the top of my head, and I just like, not just that as well, I'm going all in on this video, so it's not just like biology and neuroscience, which you guys know I have a background in. When I was doing biomed at uni before I changed course, I was going to specialise in neuroscience. That's kind of my thing.
Well, I've done a module now in cognitive neuroscience, and I'm thinking of doing one for my master's degree. So I guess we've got some common ground there.
But I'm also looking at this from an anthropological and sociological perspective.
Oh, okay, so if you're looking at it from a sociological and anthropological point of view, there's a book that I think you're going to really struggle to refute in terms of the problem of pair bonding, or the fact that pair bonding exists, and that is a book called Sex and Culture by J.D. Unwin. Now, this was written in the 1920s by a sociologist called J.D. Unwin, of course. I think he was at the University of Oxford. And he goes through 86 different examples of primitive societies and civilizations, and how they have declined as the attitudes towards monogamy and polygamy have changed. Now, he sets out 4 different categories. Enforced monogamy, enforced polygamy, this kind of loose, I can't remember the exact term, loose, I will call it loose monogamy, and loose polygamy. And he makes very clear that the monogamous variants of civilizations are more effective, and the enforced version of monogamy is far more effective because of the way it approaches sex. There's energy that would have been applied, perhaps finding more women, would otherwise be applied to more important things like building bridges. and building walls. But as society becomes more sexually deregulated, as we live in right now, there's less energy to do that because people are more drawn into lust. Now, he uses the term energy. If we were to talk from, say, Thomas Aquinas' perspective, or from a generally speaking scholastic to mystic perspective, as the kind that I kind of semi-profess on this channel, right? We would be talking more about society losing control over the virtue of chastity, the sub-virtue of chastity, and how this dulls the intellect and therefore dulls the ability for somebody to determine right and wrong. Now, that's often what essentially Aquinas would be saying is that intelligence goes down as lust goes down, which sounds like a very strange thing to a modern person, but when you understand intelligence to be the ability to discern between right and wrong, it makes a lot more sense. Because if you're willing to pursue something as immediately pleasurable as sex at the expense of long-term gain, because you have no self-control, then you're not going to be able to commit to long-term projects like building cathedrals, or indeed building beautiful things. So yeah, I'd go and read at the very least J.D. Unwin. If you're going to not read that, then you can read the scriptures, right? You can read the Bible, and you can read Flavius Josephus' Antiquities, because he shows how Israelite society changed with the changing attitudes towards sexuality. In fact, Ezekiel has some very interesting chapters on that particular thing. Although he's referring to idolatry, it does also mirror in the sexual realm as well. In fact, you can look at all sorts of things. I imagine that Ibn Khaldun, when he's talking about the differences between Berber civilization, Bedouin civilization, and settled peoples, and how settled peoples tend to degenerate and eventually get taken over by Bedouin and nomadic peoples. Right? I imagine he says similar things, although Ibn Khaldun is kind of a strange writer. But still, there's a bunch of different things that you can go read.
I'm just kind of looking at the overall biology of this. There's so much that the guys who put forward, they're like, oh, if you have sex, you can't pair bond. Like,
well, I mean, it's not like that. It's if you are promiscuous, then you will have a low chance of pair bonding, as we know from the divorce rates. If you are truly bonded to your husband and wife, you are not going to divorce them. And we see that as the number of sexual partners increases, that reduces as well. But there are also other things like there's also correlation with IQ. There's correlation with mental health as well. There's all sorts of different correlations, actually. Some which are politically incorrect, but there's no sense in me mentioning them here. I've already been politically incorrect enough in the stream.
They try and use science to back that up, and it's so messed up. Their whole basis for that is from this one paper from the late 70s, early 80s, I think, off the top of my head.
It's not their only basis. I've just given you a bunch, because Sex and Culture was given to me by a guy called Coach Redpill. And that's a 600-page book with 86 examples as well as that study. They don't need that one study. In fact, the fact that history so repeatedly proves that as a society becomes more licentious, it begins to break down. You don't need a study. You can just go read history.
I can't remember the exact one. And it completely... It just misses so much. Like, the biggest, most fundamental flaw is that it assumes that the levels of certain hormones in blood plasma are the same as the levels of hormones in the brain, and that they do the same things and act in the same way. Basically, they're comparing hormones in the brain of prairie voles to hormones in the blood plasma of humans, and saying, because these act...
Well, you see, it's a lot easier, actually, to look at our own country's history, right? The Protestant Reformation, or the Protestant Revolution, as it should be called. Henry VIII wanted another wife. Martin Luther married a nun. And there's all sorts of strange things that went on during the Protestant Reformation, actually, that people don't really talk about. There were harems. There were people having multiple wives. The biggest example of this would be the Siege of Münster in 1535. And at the same time, we see not only the reintroduction of slavery in Europe, in the Protestant countries, because it was stamped out in Britain at the Synod of London in 1102 under Saint Anselm of Canterbury. Some of you may have heard of him. You see the reduction in the wealth of the average poor person. In fact, it got to a point in Britain where the Vagrancy Act had to be passed, where people who were caught on land they didn't really live on, because they were made homeless because they got rid of the last of the serfs. Yeah, they'd brand them, and if you got branded enough times or caught enough times, you'd be sold into slavery. In fact, one of the receipts that we see for the slaves sold to the Ottoman Sultan was for 3,000 castrated Englishmen through Aberdeen. And this was all as a result of the licentiousness of the Protestant reformers. Henry VIII and his 6 wives, I'm sure this lady has heard of, but it was everywhere. The breakdown of the monasteries, which were really that place of true virginity in that world. And so we see the link between the licentiousness of the rulers and the resultant dulling of the intellect, and the reduction in the prosperity of its citizens. In fact, one of the biggest examples of this, in fact I can think of 2, but yeah, we'll talk about the first one, the Pilgrimage of Grace in England, where thousands of Catholic northerners went down tried to reach the king in London to force him to stop the separation with Rome for the sake of Anne Boleyn. He tricked them and he killed thousands of them. It set back, according to my history teacher, it set the North back 100 years economically. And all of this was as a result of him wanting to secure the succession, first of all, and second of all, to satisfy his lusts on Anne Boleyn. She didn't last very long, as we all know. In fact, yeah, I think the best example of this is the Siege of Münster in 1535. But the other example I'm thinking of is the War in the Vendée, which occurred in the 1790s. I believe it started in 1793, when the French Revolution really got in earnest. Because one of the things they don't talk about much is how licentious the French Revolution was. How much of this promiscuity was going on. For example, the cult of the Supreme Being, which seized pretty much all of the churches, at the very least in Paris. I think they did it in most of the major cities as well. They would strip the cathedrals of the statues of the Blessed Virgin and Our Lord, and they would defile prostitutes on the altar. Now, this, as well as the conscription of French soldiers to fight against the Austrians and the various German states under the Holy Roman Empire, this required a draft, and the Vendéans refused, because not only had they clamped down on the clergy through the civil constitution of the clergy, but also they were trying to conscript their men to fight for essentially what these peasants viewed as the Antichrist, because they saw what was going on with these philosophes and their licentiousness and degeneracy. And what resulted was probably the world's first genocide. They literally tied together nuns and priests naked and threw them into the rivers around in the Vendée, which is in western France. And there was all sorts of unpleasantries committed against women, and all of this came out of a group of French lawyers and French, not so much noblemen by that point, but rich people who were overly uncontrolled in their sex life. The biggest example of this being the Marquis de Sade. In fact, E. Michael Jones, in his book Libido Dominandi, points out that one of the biggest influences on the French Revolution was the Marquis de Sade yelling from his Bastille prison cell for the rioters to take the prison. So you see this link throughout history. That's just 2 examples given to me on the fly. Given by me on the fly, even. But there are just so many. The pornocracy in the 10th century in the Papal States. That's another example, because that degenerated the control of the Pope as well. Like, you don't even need to do it. Anyway, we're nearly done with this, so if you guys want to just stick questions in the chat, we'll finish this up and I'll answer questions.
Weight in voles, in this one particular species of voles, not even just all voles. This means all humans act like this. The jump is... Anyway, that's the video that I'm currently working on, and it's so fascinating. It's really interesting, and I'm really enjoying it, but it's very, very science heavy, and it's taking me a long time to kind of read through all this stuff and work through it. I've had a lovely day, actually. I've been sat out on the balcony, just like in the sun. I was in like a little t-shirt and shorts, just kind of getting a little bit of a tan. I'm there, I'm reading, I'm writing. I had Kyra cuddling me. We played a little bit of fetch. It was just a really nice day, but my brain was very, very tired. And I was like, you know what? I need to work on something kind of relaxing and fun and kind of turn my brain off all the serious stuff for now. So I figured something like this where we could have a giggle and be a bit silly, but also, you know, learn something and talk about something important was going to be a good thing. So,
what is the book called? It is Sex and Culture, Mr. Empire.
Yeah, there you go. That's this video. And with that in mind, thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts on all of this traditional wife stuff and the views.
I'll tell you what I think. I think it's very noble that women would completely stand against the culture at the moment and sacrifice themselves like that. I think it's very difficult for a woman to come out and say that, particularly where I am.
Presented in this blog down in the comments.
If I'm not mistaken, Robespierre ironically believed that he would be born again from a woman after he died. I'm not surprised they had those kinds of strange beliefs. Not long afterwards, a lot of the Hindu ideas were praised by people like Schopenhauer, and I suspect that may have been a forerunner to that kind of view.
Hello, I love hearing your thoughts. I do read all your comments. Okay, I'm rambling. I'm shutting.
Depends if you watch all your response streams.
Yep, I'm gonna go. Have a great evening, or morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'll see you again very, very, very soon.
Okay, that's over with. I like how MPV closed itself. That makes things a bit easier. Right, so questions. Have you ever read the dialogue between a priest and a dying man by the Marquis de Sade? No, I haven't read any of the Marquis de Sade's works. I've had friends that have read them and told me that it's kind of stomach-turning stuff. I'll give you my friend's words. Right, he said that 120 days in something that I probably shouldn't mention on stream. It makes 50 Shades of Grey look like a kid's book. So no, I haven't read that. You know, guys, just ask any questions, right? Especially if you're on the riot, right? If you're on the riot, I'll actually check that right now because I'm checking that. I'm in kind of naughty a bit. So, off-topic question: what is your response to the Christian violence like the Inquisition? I'm asking because I had a dream about this question. Okay, so sorry, people are tagging me and stuff. I haven't been reading the chat. So the Inquisition was essentially set up to protect society against heretics, because in the same way that a serial killer murders the body, heretics murder the soul by disconnecting them from God. And so they were considered a very serious threat at one time. Now, the biggest place where these were used was in Spain. It was also used in... There were also other things like witch hunts that went on in Germany that were a similar... I mean, not really similar in that way, but, you know, they went after unorthodox, that meaning incorrect, opinions. But it was mostly active in southern Spain, and they dealt with conversos, those being Jews and Muslims that converted to Christianity after the Alhambra decree. And they were trying to make sure that these people weren't bringing back Islam and Judaism to the lands that were conquered by Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Now, the modern person finds this very difficult to entertain because they, again, just believe that religions are just kind of these uniforms that you all wear in factories. They aren't. The king and queen of Spain were very concerned that the Muslims and the Jews, and indeed in the north of Spain the Protestants, would destabilise their country. Because bear in mind, the Reconquista had only just happened when the Alhambra decree was declared, and they didn't want any revanchism from Muslim forces in southern Spain. So the Inquisition was deployed there. Although the Inquisition was everywhere. In fact, St. Ignatius of Loyola had interactions with the Inquisition. It was largely just a means of preventing societal subversion. Now, the violence itself was generally inflicted by the state because the state had a temporal interest in destroying heretics. Now, the church, of course, had an interest as well, but it wasn't the same. It was interested in people's souls. The state was interested in keeping society stable, and so they would hand out death penalties to some heretics. The only instance I can think of where the church actually executed a heretic would be Jan Hus at the Council of Constance in 1415, and that was because he was stoking up tensions so much in what is now the Czech Republic that it could very seriously threaten Christendom, because there were 3 popes when he was stirring things up, and this was solved at Constance in 1415. Okay. Next question. Best books on the French Revolution. I've heard very good things about Reflections on France by not the Marquis de Sade, but Joseph de Maistre. I haven't read that though. Out of the books that I've read, my favourite one was probably The Ancien Régime and the Revolution by Alexis de Tocqueville. I've also heard good things about Reflections on France by Edmund Burke, but I never finished that. I listened through a little bit of it. There's also The Oxford History of the French Revolution by William Doyle, which is pretty good. But then again, I read that when I was an atheist who was very sympathetic to John Calvin. So, you may want to take that with a grain of salt. There's also Simon Sharma's book, Citizens. There's one by this famous French Marxist historian that I can't remember the name of. Georges something. It was published in 1940, and it's a really big one. Not Georges Danton, he was someone in the Revolution. Georges Leclerc or something like that. I can't remember his name. But that was quite good, I thought, even though it was Marxist history. I'm not talking about the Smart, I'm talking about the Atheist Apologist tract. Yeah, I've never read it. I think Teresa of Avila, yeah, a lot of these big religious figures were inquisitioned because they were understandably very jumpy. Where do we go on riots to ask questions for future streams? What books on the Inquisition would you recommend? I've never read any books on the Inquisition. As for the riot, I haven't made a room for that, but now you mention it, you can use the books. I will make a questions channel as we speak. I'll create a room and I'll call it questions, and then you guys can find it on the Explore tab. It's public and you guys can just throw questions in there. There you go. Have you read Thus Spoke Zarathustra? No, I haven't. The only books that I have even made an attempt at with Nietzsche were Beyond Good and Evil and The Genealogy of Morals. Okay, I think we're going to bring this to a close. It's been nearly 2 hours. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. They did actually try to kill the Sard at one point, I think. Anyway, I'll see you guys later, and good